Jeffrey Epstein was in jail and facing big time in the slammer. However, he was found dead in his jail cell. Was it suicide, or were other things in play? We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster, what some people are calling, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals interviewed and participating in this show and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Charlie Crimebuster. So glad to have you on the crime train today. We're going to be talking about Jeffrey Epstein, the real tragedy. This is part 4. If you'd like to get the other parts, go on over to charliecrimebuster.com. Hit on episodes and you can get caught up. But before we get into this today, let me first of all welcome our new listeners. Every single week we get new listeners to the podcast. And we are appreciative of the thousands of downloads that we see happening with Charlie Crimebuster. So if you're a seasoned listener or even you're a first-time listener, welcome and thank you for joining us on the ride today. Hey, if you'd like to reach out with a shout-out, you can reach me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the program, you can then go to peacemakernetwork.com. Peacemakernetwork.com. You become a badge, BADGE supporter for as little as $3 a month. Hey, not only will you help the program, but you'll help the first responders, the cops, the military, those brave men and women who go toward danger instead of away from danger. Going over to peacemakernetwork.com, read how you can be a part of a great program of helping those brave men and women, and also you'll help the podcast. By the way, also, if you would like, again, to get caught up, go to charliecrimebuster.com. Thank you for being a part of our program today. Now, let's summarize how Jeffrey Epstein got to where he was found dead in a jail cell. As you know, Jeffrey Epstein, as we told you before, he grew up there in New York. He was an average young lad. At first, a little bit on the chubby side, that's according to others, but he had a good mind for math, and he actually was able to tutor other students. I'm sure probably, knowing as we know him now, it was probably for some sort of fee, maybe free lunch money or something like that, I don't know. But somehow, after he got out of high school, he actually got a job teaching at a local college, even though he had not completed his own college degree. Now, while he was there as a teacher, he already showed his interest in the opposite sex, flirted with the students, attended the students' parties, and according to some people was somewhat inappropriate in how he handled himself. But he also met people in high places. You see, one of his students, was a child of a high, powerful financial advisor who was in charge of Bear Stearns. Now there, he went on from teaching to become a investment advisor. And he became so successful as a financial advisor, oh boy, he made money, lots and lots of money, over investing other people's money. That's how he made those millions of dollars. And while he was on the road to riches, he met a woman by the last name of Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell, who actually became his girlfriend, and they really formed a most unusual relationship. You see, she actually told a friend that Jeffrey had such a strong sexual appetite that she alone could not fulfill it. So she would go out and find other women to help him with these urges. The problem was that many of these other women, they were underage girls that were brought to him under the ruse of performing a massage, which actually turned out to be code for some sex act of some sort. Now, having sex with a minor is against the law, whether you pay for it or not, and somehow he and Maxwell appeared to think that they were above the law, and that they would be able to buy their way out of any such trouble. Now, they would even expand their hunt for these women by paying others to reach others, much like a MLM marketing scam. Now, one of the young women was a young 14-year-old girl. I say women, she was a girl, 14 years old. And that particular incident with Epstein was reported to the police. This was in the mid-2000 years, 2005, sometime like that. And from there, well, the Palm Beach Police Department launched an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the investigation had several complainants, lots of evidence, and they wanted to nail this guy. They wanted to put this guy away, particularly the chief of the down there in Palm Beach, the chief there, who I had actually met at one time. He really wanted to put this guy behind bars. However, when he turned it over to the local district attorney, the district attorney, instead of charging Epstein, well, he decided to take it to the grand jury. And whether intentional or not, he did a very poor job of presenting the case to the grand jury. Had that only one little 14-year-old girl testifying, and in my opinion, she was not supported very well by the district attorney, and there was not that supporting evidence that would have easily gained felony indictments for Epstein's and would have put him in prison. That's one of the real tragedies of this whole story. He could have been stopped a long, long time ago. So one of the investigators, by the way, of the police department, seeing the prosecution tanking their investigation, well, he took it upon his own accord, and he drew up his own arrest charges. And my friend, these charges would have put Jeffrey Epstein away for a long, long time. However, even those charges was rebuffed with the prosecutor there refusing to act upon these charges. Well, as you can imagine now, the police department was frustrated that Epstein was seemingly going to skate on these serious charges. However, then, hope came back into the investigation, because now the FBI was brought into the case. And the FBI, as the Palm Beach Police Department, they launched a very good investigation into these crimes. Looked like now something was going to be done to get this sexual maniac off the streets. But then enters the federal prosecutor, Acosta. That's the same guy, by the way, who was appointed by President Trump to Labor's secretary position. At first, though, they thought that Acosta was going to deliver the goods, that Epstein was going to literally get what he deserved. But then, by all reporting, Acosta's office was way out negotiated. That's right, way out negotiated, with Epstein's lawyers ending up giving Epstein a sweetheart deal that ended with him serving only 13 months of an 18-month sentence. And during that time, he was awarded work release. By the way, that work release ended up with him serving 6 days a week at his own foundation office, not behind bars, but at his own foundation office for 12 hours a day on a work release program. It was even reported that he had an entire section of the jail for himself, and he was provided sheriff's deputies doing security for him while he was out on work release, paid for by Epstein, of course. After all, he had the money, right? It was also reported that while he was at work release, on more than one occasion, he went to his own home for 2-hour stays. Now, something interesting, one of the deputies actually contacted his supervisor and asked him if this thing of him going to his home was something that they should allow to happen. And the supervisor basically said, well, we're there to do security. We're paid to do security, and that's it. Some really very unusual things happening on this work release. We know for one thing that it was truly a glamour slammer sweetheart deal for Epstein. In fact, one of his victims, she said it was pretend jail. She went on to say, well, if I ever went to jail, that's the kind of jail I would want to be in. Now, it was also alleged that while he was out on work release, he continued to have sex, since people were coming and going out of his office, being flown in from other areas. And at this time, remember, his office was not under camera. His office was not monitored. The deputies were not inside with him all the time. Now, if you want to know more about this sweetheart deal, let me encourage you to go to charliecrimebuster.com. Hit on the episodes. There you can get caught up with the first 3 parts of the series, Jeffrey Epstein, The Real Tragedy. Now, you can also find the series on your favorite podcast platform. Just search Charlie Crimebuster Crime Talk. Charlie Crimebuster Crime Talk. Now, it did look like he was going to skate his crimes, but then a tweet, a newspaper article, or several of them, an accomplice, turned the tables and led to another arrest. More about that in a moment. But right now, it is time for what we call our Crazy Crook Story of the Week. Our Crazy Crook Story this week has to do with a bank robbery. In other words, the guy walked in the bank. He said, "This is a robbery. Put the money in the bag and I will walk out. This is a robbery. God help us all." That's what the note read, according to an arrest affidavit. However, it did not include that this guy by the name of Nash, this crazy crook, that he included his personal information on the note this time around. Now, note I said this time around. Hang on. You're going to find out a whole lot more about this. Now, the supervisor immediately yelled for the bank door to be locked by way of a secondary locking mechanism, and he called 911. But Nash, after he got the money, he just continued standing there in front of the branch. His name is Michael Gale Nash. Now, he slipped a note through the locked doors of the First National Bank in Anchorage demanding money. A nervous, stuttering Nash, well, he rejected the bank securities officer pleas for him to leave. Instead, he encouraged the security guard to call the police. When they finally arrived, Will Nash peacefully submitted and was transported to the Anchorage Police Department. That's happened up in Alaska. Now, FBI Anchorage, they read a records check for Michael Gale Nash, and that revealed that Nash was arrested, charged, and convicted for robbing the same bank in 2018. Now, although he followed a near-identical method of operations on that Monday morning, well, that Monday morning holdup was not nearly as effective as his 2018 heist. Nash made off with $400 in a bag after handing the teller a note on a completed form for affordable housing. Now get this. He handed the note to the teller that has already completed with his names and everything on a form for affordable housing. The note said, "This is a holdup. Put the money in a bag." Again, God help us. And after a few minutes, Will Nash, he was spotted sitting outside the bank counting the bills. Yep. Decided he wanted to count to see how much money he got away with, only he didn't get away with it. He got caught, as most of these crazy crooks do. So this crazy crook, who returns for another heist at the same bank and once again takes his time on his getaway to count his loot, well, he is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. But now back to our main focus. So while Jeffrey Epstein thought that his legal problems for his violation of underage minors was all behind him, you see, these victims, they just did not go away. They began to take their cases to civil court. It is understandable, in that he got away with a mere slap on the wrist compared to what he could have gotten. It's understandable that these victims wanted more justice. Now, in a past episode, I shared with you how there was also tied to the sweetheart deal a commitment not to hold any of his co-conspirators responsible. Of course, meaning Ghislaine Maxwell and others who pimped out these minor-aged girls. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell, who missed a close brush with the law back then, well, she appeared now to be putting distance between she and Jeffrey. She was even attempting a do-over for her image, immersed herself in a charity to help save the ocean. And as I've said before, too bad she was more interested, seemingly, in saving the ocean than saving young minors from being sexually abused. And the victims, well, they began to take matters into their own hands and they decided to go to civil court. They put Ghislaine Maxwell into their crosshairs with a civil suit. And when Maxwell was sure that Jeffrey would come to her rescue in civil court, actually he had come to her rescue in that sweetheart deal, well, she thought for sure he would come and testify that Maxwell was innocent. Oh, but she was disappointed to find Epstein following the advice of his own lawyers and not testifying in her behalf. Now, at the same time, the Miami newspaper, if you remember, was printing out some of the information that was coming from many of these civil court proceedings. Then comes what we shared with you, the Me Too movement. And those who were using their prestige and their power and their money to avoid prosecution, suddenly now they become the target for investigations. And money and power and prestige could no longer protect them. So it was in this era that the evidence resurfaced on how Epstein was not only abusing minors, but was involved in sex trafficking as well. Now, since Jeffrey Epstein always elevated himself by those he associated with, well, there were other names that came to the forefront as associating with Epstein. Important, well-known people. People like Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, and Prince Andrew. Now, while there's not any real evidence that Trump and Clinton took part in the sexual abuse of women, well, not so with Prince Andrew. Epstein and Prince Andrew, among other things, they went on vacations together, and they were pictured on a yacht in Thailand, surrounded by topless young women. And one of Epstein's victims, Robert Scuffrey, she claimed she was first trafficked by Epstein to have sex with Prince Andrew in Maxwell's London home after dancing with him at a nightclub. She has now claimed that she had sex with Prince Andrew 3 times, and others have collaborated, seeing the two together, despite the fact that Prince Andrew says that he has, quote, unquote, no memory, no recollection of her. Now, it's also amazing that after Jeffrey Epstein's last arrest and the mood in the country to no longer let these men hide behind their money and their prestige, well, they immediately began to big time make distance between them and Epstein. For instance, following Epstein's, but there were times when they were together. Although after his arrest, even Trump would ban him from Trump properties. Now, former President Bill Clinton also took some plane rides with Epstein. But all of these folks, they begin to distance themselves. That is, other than Prince Andrew, there is no evidence that Trump or Clinton were involved in underage minors like Epstein was. However, it is this association with the high and mighty that leads many people to believe that there was much more to Epstein's death than suicide. Many people believe that it happened to keep him from telling the goods on some of these high and mighty people. But what really happened to him while he was in that jail cell where he died? We're going to get to that in a moment, but right now it is time for our Scam Alert. And here is our Scam Alert with James Buckland.
Thank you, Charlie Crimebuster. This week we're going to be talking about property fraud. Well, what is property fraud? Well, that's when someone illegally uses your property for financial gain. So how does it happen? Well, it's when someone records a fraudulent document in the comptroller's office, making it look like they own your home or property. Should you be concerned? Well, of course you should be. According to the FBI, property and mortgage fraud is the fastest growing white-collar crime. So what can you do about it? Contact the Property Fraud Alert Hotline at 1-800-728-3858. That's 1-800-728-3858. At Charlie Crimebuster, we strive to keep you safe.
Thank you, James, for that. Every week we try to bring you some news you can use, and James on these scam alerts is right on target. Now, as in any high-profile death, there are often rumors associated with how that person died. So let's talk about what really happened on that day. It was a Saturday as Epstein arrived from overseas on a private jet to an airport in New Jersey. Now, according to the federal prosecutor, Jamie Nowday, they got him straight from the plane, and that indicates, obviously, a sense of urgency. Now, it could be that prosecutors believed that he was a flight risk, so that's why they arrested him right from that plane. Or it could even believe that there are some ongoing criminal conduct. Interesting enough, Epstein was 66 years of age on the day he was arrested. Now, some of you may wonder, why could they arrest him after the deal agreement in the past? That is the sweetheart deal that I shared with you on a past episode. Now, while it is true that Acosta's deal prohibited additional prosecution for those charges in Florida and others, a judge ruled, now get this, a judge ruled that Acosta did not follow the law. He did not follow the law because the law said that he needed to contact the victims prior to agreeing to the deal. Thus now, that case would not hinder the prosecution of Epstein now after his last arrest. Now, to be sure, that would have been argued of court. That is, of course, Epstein was still alive, but it's a non-issue now. So, he dies in the jail cell. Was it suicide? Did another prisoner do that to him? Was he killed because he knew too much? Again, I recently saw a poll that says most people do not believe that his death was suicide. So let's talk about the day he died. The day before, he was found in his cell dead. Well, he had a cellmate by the name of Reyes, and Reyes was taken to court, but Reyes did not return to the cell. He was moved somewhere else. So Epstein was alone in that cell. Now, keep in mind that Epstein was under psychological observation at the time. And this was because of an earlier suicide attempt that left his neck bruised. He had actually spent 31 hours on suicide watch. But then he convinced the jail therapist that he was okay. In fact, he said, quote unquote, he had a wonderful life and would be crazy to end it. Now, on August the 9th, after his cellmate was gone to court, never to return to the cell with Epstein spent that day, most of the day, with his attorneys. Makes it back to his cell at 6:45 p.m. At 7 o'clock, he makes a social call. It is reported that he told officials he was calling his mother. However, his mother was already dead. She had already died. And this was on the night of August the 9th. Really don't know who that phone call went to. On Saturday morning, August the 10th, though, he was found dead in his cell. Now, as you can imagine, his death was thoroughly investigated, and here is what was reported. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office, they ruled Epstein's death a suicide by hanging, but yet there was another forensic pathologist who observed the 4-hour autopsy. He was hired by Epstein's brother, Mark. And this guy tells 60 Minutes that the evidence released so far points more to murder than suicide in his view. And Dr. Michael Baden's key reason, well, he said it was the unusual fractures he saw in Epstein's neck. There were fractures of the left and right thyroid cartilage and the left hyoid bone. That's what Baden said. And he goes on to say, quote, I've never seen 3 fractures like this in a suicidal hanging. But going over 1,000 jail hangings, suicides in New York City and state prisons over the 40 to 50 years, he went on to say that no one had 3 fractures. But yet, the medical examiner's office said that it stands firmly behind its finding of suicide by hanging. And they argued that those fractures could be seen in both suicides and homicides. Now, Epstein was directing money to be deposited in other inmates' commissary accounts in exchange for protection. And many people say that was because he feared for his life. But the government says Epstein was suicidal. Actually had made his first failed suicide attempt just weeks after he arrived there at jail. And according to a federal indictment on the 23rd of July, Epstein was found on his floor of his cell with a strip of bed sheet around his neck. The government says it was a failed suicide attempt. Epstein, though, He claimed that his cellmate, a 52-year-old former police officer by the name of Nick, attacked him. And Nick, who was accused of murdering 4 men, well, he denied that. And Nick's lawyer says absolutely nothing like that happened. His lawyers also said that Nick was cleared by jail officials. So now Epstein is put on suicide watch after the incident. But 1 week later, at the direction of the staff, he was taken off a suicide watch and was required to have, quote, an assigned cellmate. But keep in mind now, Epstein did not have this cellmate housed with him the day he died. Now, according to court documents, no new cellmate was assigned before he died, even though he was required to have one. That night, federal prosecutor says, Epstein was escorted to his cell by a guard by the name of Noel at approximately 7:49 p.m. Now, Noel and Michael Thomas were the 2 guards working the overnight shift in Epstein's unit. They allegedly did not check on him again. Put him in the cell, 7:49 p.m., did not even check on him again until 6:30 the next morning. By the way, those 2 guards have been charged of falsifying documents, conspiracy to defraud the government, and they have pleaded not guilty to that. Now, Lindsley told 60 Minutes the guard should have been checking on Epstein every half hour. He went on to say, it's my understanding, based on the documents that I examined, 2 officers that were working in the special housing unit falsified the records and did not do any rounds for approximately 8 hours. Now, my friend, that is a huge, huge deal. This is a basic operational aspect of managing a jail. Federal prosecutors say surveillance videos makes clear that the guards, instead of checking on him, they searched the internet, and they appeared to have been asleep. So they're looking on the internet, shopping, and sleeping when they should have been checking on him on that overtime shift. Now, one thing the video does not show is Epstein's cell door, nor the doors to the other inmates on the unit. Sources, they tell us that, well, the camera should have captured those angles, but the camera was not working. It was corrupted on the night of Epstein's death. More things to make you say, Incidentally, his cell was about 15 feet away and up a set of stairs from the guard station, with a single locked gate between them. So, the official investigation says he died of suicide, and he was able to do so because of the negligence of the jail itself. Now, my friend, let me say, just like as all police officers are not bullies who take the law into their own hand, only a very, very small percentage are, there are also many, many great correctional officers. So you cannot lay the blame on all correctional officers. Most of the correctional officers I know, well, they're far overworked and underpaid. In fact, because it's so difficult to hire people who have spent a third or more of their life standing between many dangerous and violent people and us, well, most jails, they're just short-staffed. They have to hire sometimes people who are not qualified for the job. If you really want to know what we should learn from this, we need to do more to support the brave men and women of corrections for sure. However, that does not change the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was able to kill himself, take a coward's way out. Or did he? You see, I think that because he could not have his glamorous slammer experience he had the first time he was locked up, I think he killed himself. And he was able to do that because 2 correctional officers on that night did not do their jobs. Well, what do you think? I'd love to hear what you say. You have a right to disagree. Reach out to me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. I believe he died of suicide, though there's a lot of speculation out there that something else may have been at hand. But before I leave, some quick lessons that are for sure. First and foremost, if you have thoughts of killing yourself, reach out for help. There are people that can help you. While you may not be able to make sense of things now because you're going through a very rough patch, you will be able to make sense later. So if you need help, reach out. There are and is help for you. Call 911. Someone will help you. Next, there are young people who were abused by this man. That's a proven fact in the trials preceding his death. So parents, I'm going to say to you, be careful and watchful of your children. Always realize that that device that your children are holding in your hand, that device that's consistently with them, well, on that device, there are lurking people. There are a multitude of people who would take advantage of your children and do them harm. Watch over your young children and your teens on social platform. And as we close out, I say again, stay alert, stay safe, for the life you save may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. If you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.